Hi everybody, welcome. We are at the North American Pizza and Culinary Academy, and as always, I'm pleased to be here with all of our friends at Red Star Yeast, my other friend Baker Betty, my beautiful friend Kristen, and today we're going to be making some great stuff. For those of you out there who have never made calzone or stromboli before, this is a great thing to make at home because it's so simple. You can do it ahead of time. You can make all these things ahead of time, and if you're having people over, guests over, they're very simple just to pop in the oven, warm up, cut them up in pieces, and then go ahead and serve them to all your friends. So today, this is what we're going to be focusing on, is making this classic New York style pizza dough, and then showing you how to use this dough to create stromboli and calzone. Kristen, you ever make calzone or stromboli before?
I have not. I've made a lot of homemade pizza, but I've never made stromboli or calzone, so I'm learning as well today.
Today, this is actually a cool thing. So for those of you who don't know, in Italian, the word calzone or calzone, all right, we talk about this kind of looking like a sock, right? I calze, we talk about socks being calze. So the calzone really comes from that, like it's a big giant sock, and we put stuffing in it. Depending on what part of Italy you're from, in our dialects, you might even hear words like panzarotti, pizza fritta, if they're fried. There's a lot of different ways that these are made, but generally the calzone is going to be one of those that's baked, right? We're going to talk about this being baked as well as the stromboli. We're using this platinum yeast from Red Star, and this is a yeast. It's dry yeast, so this is going to work very quickly. And like I had started talking about previously, this is the yeast that I chose to use because in this method, we're going to be making a pizza dough. This is a New York pizza dough for all intensive purposes. If you make this dough at home, you can actually use this, make a dough ball, and actually roll this out into a nice round circle, maybe 12 inches or 14 inches, and then bake this and do a beautiful New York round pizza as well. So this is a very versatile dough that we're going to be doing today. The great thing about this yeast is that this is going to allow us to make dough right now. We're going to let this proof up in a bowl for about an hour. Then we're going to divide it into dough balls, let those proof again for about an hour, and then we're ready to start making calzone and stromboli. That's what we're here to do today, okay? So this is the platinum yeast from Red Star. You want to talk about, again, what the enhancers are in here, why it's great?
Yep. So the platinum yeast from Red Star is sort of two products in one. So it includes Red Star's rapid rise yeast, but added to that yeast is some dough improvers. And what that does is it helps strengthen your dough. It gives it a little more sensibility so that your dough is going to rise higher and become more airy and fluffy. So this yeast is great for anyone to use, but especially if you are somebody who's a little bit intimidated by yeast, it is kind of a foolproof yeast to use so that you can be ensured that your dough is going to rise.
The other key thing that I'm doing right now, and this I call this method of making dough my grandma style dough or my nana dough, because this is something I remember as a kid. My grandma would make her dough, and she would make it in the morning and allow it to proof up, and every time it would, be bulging out of the bowl, she'd knock it down with her fist, cover it up, and let it rise a few times, and then she would go ahead and start making her pizzas. So the one thing that's very important is the water, and you can see there's a lot of humidity and condensation inside of this beaker because this is not cold water. This water is about 85, 90 degrees, and that water temperature is critical for allowing the yeast to work faster. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add all the water into my mixer. I'm using a stand mixer, or maybe in the professional world we might refer to this as a planetary style mixer, which refers to the way that the hook revolves around the inside of the bowl, kind of like the planets in the sun, doing its thing. So I've got all my water in here. The second thing that I'm going to add is my salt. Now, it's important to remember when we talk about New York style pizza dough, that the New York pizza dough really was derived kind of from that Neapolitan pizza. And when the immigrants came from Italy and they landed on the East Coast, let's say they landed in New York, They were looking to make the pizza like they had back home. The only thing that changed was the type of equipment and the ingredients that they had. So in the traditional Neapolitan dough, those of you who follow any of my other feeds or YouTube channel, you'll have seen videos of me doing this. So the salt would be added in the beginning of the mix into the water. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add this in. This is fine sea salt from an area of Sicily called Trapani. Trapani is known for having some of the best salt flats in the world. I'm going to take a whisk, or you could use your hands if you want, and I'm just going to give this a nice stir because I want to dissolve that salt into the water. The great thing about using sea salt is that sea salt comes from water and it wants to go back into water very easily. So my sea salt is dissolved now into my water. And then what I'm going to do next is I want to talk to you about flour. I've got two different kinds of flour in here that we're going to be using. The first one, this is all-purpose flour. This is from a company called Sarasota. On the East Coast, you might hear this referred to as Heckers. And this is the parent company. They're both interchangeable. You're either going to find it under Heckers or you're going to find it under Sarasota. Back in the day when I was a kid and I first started making pizzas when I was a young boy, I remember that Sarasota was like the really good flour compared to whatever else was on the market. And years later, we figured out why it was so good, is because this particular flour has the highest protein of all the all-purpose flours. So we're talking about being somewhere about 11.5 to 12.5% protein, which is not a light flour by any means. It's a little bit lighter than, let's say, bread flour, which is about 14% protein. But what we're referring to specifically is the strength of the gluten that we're creating. The more gluten that we create, the stronger the dough, and the longer it takes to relax that dough. So if we use something that was maybe like a bread flour, 14% protein, something in that range, those are the types of doughs that I like to make today. I would use cold water instead of this warm water, and then I would divide my doughs, put the individual dough portions into the cooler for about 24 hours or my refrigerator, and then that 14% protein would make a beautiful open cell structure where Mother Nature has had some time to break it down. In this case, though, that we're going to be working very quickly and we're going to utilize this dough right now, this is why I prefer to work with like a mid-weight flour like we're referring to, somewhere in that kind of 11.5 to 12.5 protein range, okay? The other flour that I'm going to be using is a fine double ground semolina flour called semola rimacinata. This is an Italian type flour. If you go to a well-stocked Italian grocery store, all right, most of the time you can find this because we use this a lot as well to make pasta, all right? This is made from hard wheat, durum wheat, and this, again, is going to do two things. Number one, it's going to give us this beautiful yellow color. Our dough is going to have this beautiful color. Number two, hard wheat has really good absorption properties. So we can add a lot of water to this dough, and it's not going to feel like a sloppy mess when we go and stretch the dough out. And then the third one is probably my favorite, is the flavor of it. We get this kind of sweetness from semolina, and I love the flavor inside of this dough. So we're using a combination of this all-purpose white flour plus semola rimacinata. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this into my bowl, okay? I'm just going to use this whisk, and I'm going to kind of just stir everything together into this bowl, okay? I'm going to take this, so our salt and our water is already inside of my bowl. And now what I'm going to do, very gently, if I can do this live on camera, I'm going to pour all of my flour, which has now been combined, okay? So this is going inside. I'm using the dough hook for this dough. And the only ingredient that we're going to have left remaining is just our extra virgin olive oil. I'm going to bring the head of this mixer down. On most of the stand mixers that you have out there, I'm going to tell you from experience that I've blown up about 7 of these things. Go ahead and do yourself a favor. Do not attempt to make dough running it higher than your second speed. All right, I have a pretty confident that most of the manufacturers actually say that. So I'm going to start mixing on the first speed, and you're going to see that when this starts up, there we go. It's kind of just like a very slow, gentle process of mixing. Now the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to open up my yeast. We're going to be using 1 full packet of platinum yeast. This is 7 grams of yeast inside of here, or 1/4 of an ounce. I prefer in all my baking to use the measurement of in grams. I poured the whole packet now just inside. And the reason why I'm using this method, first of all, this is an instant type yeast, meaning it'll work in an instant. You can mix it in with the flour and it'll do its work, right? But as the mixer is moving, we're creating gluten, and I'm folding that yeast kind of into the gluten strands that are being created. At this point now, as the dough starts to come together inside of my machine, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to very slowly begin to drizzle in my olive oil. That addition of olive oil as this continues to mix, again, is going to kind of coat the strands of the gluten and act as a lubricant. This is going to give us this beautiful elasticity to this dough. Now, the last thing that I'm going to tell you is I'm not going to mix this dough to completion. I'm going to go maybe about 2 to 3 minutes, and then I'm going to finish working this dough on the counter. The reason being is because this type of machine, while it does a really good job at mixing, in my professional opinion, it's a little bit abusive to the dough itself. And I have a feeling that it kind of tears at the gluten structure a little bit. So in my preference, I would rather take the dough out just like this, where you see that the dough has come together, but it's not nice and smooth and fully mixed. And I want to show you the movement of my hand. So I literally just took the dough out, I put it in front of me. When I'm kneading, I'm using the heel of my palm, this part of my palm here, and this is actually what's doing the work. When I do my classes, I like to make the example of, show me the way that an airplane takes off. And we would go like, zoom, like the airplane goes up like this. And this is kind of like the motion of when we're doing this. I heard that from somebody.
I heard that. I like it.
I stole it from somebody. I cannot take credit. Anyways, what I'm doing is I'm pushing forward, and then using the tips of my fingers, I'm rolling the dough back. And as I continue to work it like this, back and forth, all right, this is going to make this seam down the middle. And I always want to work with the seam in front of me. And then what we're doing is, as I turn this, it's going to create like these layers as we're layering this gluten. And it's going to give us a stronger, better dough. And the idea of the dough is really we're just creating almost like a package, a net, to capture all of that carbon dioxide created by the by the yeast, and this is what's going to get our dough to rise really nice. So again, as soon as you have something that looks kind of like a burrito, we would turn it sideways so that the seam is in front of us. We turn it just like this, and then again start to knead this the opposite way. And with just a small amount of mixing, I'm already got a nice smooth surface that's beginning to develop. Now this dough, I would say by hand, you're probably going to end up kneading this by hand for about 3 minutes, because the rest of the work is not going to be done actively. We're going to let Mother Nature do it, and it's going to rise, and the dough itself is going to finish kind of kneading while it's doing that rising step. I see a lot of, this guy's really cute, and
yeah, I did see somebody say that they were intimidated by working with yeast. So again, seek out this platinum. If you go onto the Red Star Yeast website, you can use their product locator and you can see if there are stores in your area that are carrying this product. I would still call the store and find out if they have it in stock, because as we know right now, things are going quickly. But yeah, you can use the locator on their website to find.
That's really good. And I saw someone, I was just peeking over, someone asked about the semolina. We call it semola rimacinata. The one I'm using today is from a very large Italian flour mill called Le Cinque Stagioni. You can also see there's another a very famous flour mill called Caputo or Antimo Caputo. They've got their own brand. There's a lot of semola rimacinata out there. A lot of different mills now are starting to produce it and get it over to the United States. So this is a really good thing because, again, it's just going to add a little bit of a different flavor to it, more beautiful. I'm actually going to... Sorry, go ahead.
Do you have a preferred brand?
I use a lot at the school, and my Italian flour mostly is Le Cinque Stagioni, which is readily available now in the United States. You can find it. Well, it's hard to find flour now. It's kind of hit or miss when you go to the store. So I would definitely tell you, if you're going to be searching for 00 flour, just find one that you think is more of a reputable brand, and always check the dates, because flour is a living, breathing thing, and if it's close to the expiration date, or if you're still baking with flour that's been in your pantry from 2 Christmas Christmases ago, like get rid of it. Just go buy yourself a brand new 5-pound bag of flour and start working with it, right?
Good advice.
So my dough is now done. I've got this nice and smooth. The dough is very soft, right? And this is the point of this. We don't want to overwork this. So this dough now, what I would do, I would take a nice clean bowl, put a little bit of olive oil and coat the inside of the bowl to kind of make a nonstick surface. We would set the dough inside and then cover it with some really nice plastic film, really nice and tight. And then we would let it sit for about 30 minutes to an hour. And then what you would have left is this bomb inside this bowl. So this has been sitting now for actually about an hour, and this is definitely ready to go. What we're looking for, and you can see the difference in the size here, where this started and where this ended up, okay? What we're looking for is for the dough to kind of double in size, all right? At that point, this is where my grandma would have punched it down with her knuckles and she would have let it rise. My grandma liked to rise her dough probably 2 to 3 times. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to take this, and all I'm going to do is just kind of dump this onto the counter. And you can see because this bowl had the olive oil inside of it, it released nice and easy. And this is just like a nice big cushion, right? If I press on this a little bit, you'll actually be able to see the formation of all these bubbles that are starting to occur. Now, this dough, okay, needs to get divided. I'm going to get rid of this. How do we divide our dough? We divide our dough very simply. I'm going to degas it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my dough, kind of make, we can make some points like this, kind of fold it over, and bring this into a nice neat package. Let's call it like this, all right? The easiest way that I can tell you how to do this is that we're looking in this Calzone and Stromboli recipe that I gave you, we're looking to make this into 3 equal portions. If you're not baking with a digital scale by now, do yourself a favor and go get yourself one, because as you start to get more involved in baking, when you take this from something that's just kind of like a pastime to more of a hobby and you get really serious about it, we're even going to stop measuring with cups and tablespoons and all that, and we prefer to work with measurements. In my preference, we use everything in the metric system just because it's so much easier to work in that method, all right? If you were taking score, you would divide this dough into 3 equal parts that are about 412 grams, all right? If you're doing your math, we've got a little over a kilo of dough, 1.2 kilos, 1,200 grams. It's very easy to do this, all right? Now, from here, how do we divide this in 3 parts? Well, we can kind of say, if we kind of do like this in the middle, I see where the middle is, and now I'm going to kind of one-eye it, right?
So Michelle's wondering about how warm the room was for that to rise in an hour.
What's our temperature here? 72?
Yes, like 72 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, we've got we got a big budget over here. We keep the heat and the air conditioning on when we need, right? But I would say this is probably very typical.
Yeah.
I've got my oven set at 500 degrees right behind me. So again, we do have a kind of normal situation like you'd have in your kitchen, where the kitchen is a little bit warmer the closer you get to the oven, but our room temperature is about 72 degrees. Now, I've got my doughs in 3 portions. If you're at home, this is probably going to be the one eye. You're going to kind of do this as close as possible, right? If you have a scale, 412 grams is the dough, is the size. So what we do next, I'm going to take one of these dough portions, all right? When I make a dough ball, the easiest way that I can teach you how to make a dough ball is to take the dough like this, kind of square it out, all right? So we've got this square like this, and just like I did before, we're going to kind of fold these over just like this. And then what I'm going to do is very gently, I'm going to find the smooth side. I'm going to make a smooth edge right here. And very gently, I'm going to pull all of these pieces into the bottom, all right? If you kind of move and pull the corners or the points into this, we're looking for something that's going to resemble a change purse, okay? And as I continue to pinch from the bottom, what's happening is that the top is getting really nice and smooth and taut. We want a nice tight dough ball because this is a way that we can control the way that this is actually going to proof and rise, all right? But because we're going to be rolling this out and we're going to be making, something that like a Stromboli or a calzone with this, the structure is going to happen more in after the dough ball has risen and we press it out, because we're going to press this dough with our hands. We're not going to use a rolling pin. If you were making even like a boule, you know, or some kind of round, we would kind of use this same method. And really what we're looking for is just to make sure that the bottom is closed nice and tight, and then what we're going to have again is that nice smooth skin. And I did a pretty good job keeping his ball about approximately the same size. Here is my dough that's been risen. So each one of those dough portions, again, you're going to get a disposable container, a bowl, stainless steel, Pyrex, whatever you want to use. Put a little bit of olive oil inside, set the dough ball inside, and then wrap it really nice and tight with plastic wrap. And what's going to happen is, as this continues to rise, you're going to create almost like a climate inside of here, an atmosphere. So we don't have to worry about rubbing a lot of olive oil on the exterior or anything like that. I really don't do that. Because as this rises up, it's going to create humidity on its own, and it's going to keep itself from forming a skin. And this is why the plastic is so important. But you can also see that during that rise, how much of those gases are actually escaping from the dough, and they're puffing up the top of this, right?
So somebody is curious about if the platinum yeast is a one-to-one substitute for other yeast. So yes, so just treat it exactly like you would any other package of dry yeast. You would just use the full package if your recipe calls for a package.
So it's really important. Dry yeast one-to-one, but it's not one-to-one if you convert to fresh yeast. Because fresh yeast is made up of 70-80% water, right? So we need more fresh yeast to make up the amount of dry yeast, because dry yeast is more concentrated, if that makes sense. All right.
One more quick question. Can this be made with the platinum sourdough yeast?
So platinum sourdough works a little bit differently in the way that it is. So yes, you could use it, but your process, you're going to find that your times might be adjusted just a little bit. I also find that with the platinum sourdough, I get a lot of color on this, so you're probably going to end up using a little bit cooler oven because it's going to get too dark. My suggestion, if you're going to use platinum sourdough to do this, I would start by testing the oven at maybe about 475, so knock about 25 degrees off the temperature, and then let this cook. Since nothing really is getting overcooked inside over here, it's really about just being able to control the browning.
Bobby Joe is asking, she says she cannot find yeast currently. So Red Star's plants are working 24/7 to make yeast as fast as they can. The demand right now is 4 times higher than what they typically see in the holiday baking season. So they are trying their hardest to keep up. They are shipping out yeast every day. So call your grocery stores, find out if they're getting any anytime soon. Red Star said you can send them a message after the live stream and they'll help you out. You can also request that your grocery store puts a limit on how many packets people are able to buy.
That's a good one.
Because they are going so quickly as soon as they get it in. And the last thing I will say about that too is check the dairy section. So they're stocking more fresh yeast right now because it is easier and quicker or not easier, but it's a quicker process for them to make. So that is refrigerated in the dairy section. So you might also check there. You might be able to find some fresh yeast there.
I would tell you that the conversion on this, if you're using 1 packet of this platinum yeast and you decide that you're going to convert this to fresh yeast, you're looking for 19 grams of fresh yeast. So 7 grams of platinum, 19 grams of fresh Red Star yeast in the cube, all right? And there's a YouTube video on my channel of how to actually divide the yeast without a scale. So,
but somebody's asking if you're using a high gluten flour.
This is not a high gluten flour. This is more of a mid-weight flour, about 11.5 to 12.5% protein. We're using an all-purpose flour. If you're looking at, let's say, 00 flours, I would tell you to stick somewhere around the range. If they call out Neapolitan flour, a flour that's kind of in that Neapolitan style is always going to be a little bit lighter protein because it's done in a manner similar to what we're doing called in giornata, meaning that we're using the dough in the same day that it was created. Again, that whole idea of the immigration of the Italians coming from Naples, arriving in New York, and this is really a really good New York pizza dough that you're going to be able to make at home and use for a lot of different things.